All right, welcome back to the Security Conversations podcast. Super excited about having Vinnie Liu on the podcast. Vinnie is co-founder and CEO at Bishop Fox. Been in the game for, gosh, I want to say 20 plus years, not necessarily to age us. Vinnie, can you introduce yourself to the audience? What does the CEO at Bishop Fox do, and what is Bishop
Yeah,
Fox?
probably starts first with Bishop Fox. We're one of the largest offensive security testing firms in the world. What that means is we spend all day, every day, trying to find vulnerabilities in our customer systems, help them understand what they need to do to remediate, and kind of give them guidance around that. Really, our job is to help our clients find the vulnerabilities so they can fix them before the bad guys can take advantage of them. And that's what we've been doing for the past 17 years. Um, my role at Bishop Fox as CEO now, but it's really evolved over time. Of course, started early on, had my hands on the keyboard a lot more, doing that type of technical testing work, specialized in certain areas over the years, and then eventually, kind of continued to where I am today, which is where I spend a lot of my time thinking about the future of offensive security, thinking about the strategy of the market, because I think it's a combination of the two that is really required in order to bring what we have available to the market in a way that can actually see the light of day. So I spent a huge amount of time doing that.
All right, I want to get into it to what your view of what the future looks like, and whether you're an optimist or a pessimist about where we're heading. But let's go back to the beginning, right? Because you did tech in college.
Yeah, I was a computer
What did you
science.
study in
I was a
college?
computer science engineering
Right,
major in college.
right. And coming out of college, you were recruited to the NSA. How much from that period of your time, one, you can talk about, and two, how much did that kind of set you up for understanding, connecting the micro to the macro and understanding what this really
Yeah.
means? And were the early underpinnings of a company already in your brain? Give me a sense of when this switch flipped, that college, heading into the NSA as an
Mhm.
analyst, and trying to figure this out. When did that happen for you?
Okay, so I'll do a little bit of a clarification and kind of a rewind even further. I mean, I really got into it like a lot of people when I was pretty young, 13, 14. And I've been playing with computers growing up my entire life, but the security aspect of it was really kind of 13, 14. And so slight correction is that I actually joined the NSA after I graduated from high school. So
Oh,
yeah, I
really?
remember I was like 17 and I was a legal adult yet, so I had to get my parents to sign off on the paperwork for it because I was a little bit young for my grade. And so I made and so I'm on in a program that recruited specifically from talented, high schoolers who had
High school kids.
specialization in like foreign language, math, computer science, and I feel like there was like some other category, but let me
Right.
point out a few other people. Okay, I'm gonna call this out. There's a few other people in the industry that were in the same program. So Chris
Really?
Eng was an earlier version of
Right.
that
Veracode.
program, and I want to say uh, David Tell from Immunity is also in that program as well. But they were kind of like earlier generations. Now I think Dave was. I'm confident that Chris was though.
When you say you were thinking and dabbling in security at the age of 13, 14, 15, there some examples, some stories of breaking things or fixing things
Yeah, I
here?
mean, I'll tell you what the most like people sometimes ask me what my first hack is, and it's like the most disappointing first hack. It's like the most it was I think it was like a Telnet or FTP login. I think it was like Telnet, and it was literally like root with no password. Like it was. I wish it could have been cooler, but it was just right there. That was like
Right.
literally the first hack. And so and obviously there were like a lot of other cool stuff that happened since then. But back then, I mean, even earlier than that, even 13 and 14, like 13 and 14 was kind of like when I really started, like maybe 12, 13 was when I really started getting access to higher speed internet. But even like leading up to that, it was a
Right.
huge amount of bulletin board systems, right? It was BBSs, it was downloading like text files and trying to figure out like piecing these things together. I think for me the hard part was I wasn't in a community that really had a lot of technology, much less the ability to even have other people who were specialized in security. Right, I grew up in Kentucky, so there just was not like a lot of people that were like had computers at home, could play with it. So there was like 20 bulletin board systems, right? Like roughly that I could
Right, right.
dial into without incurring long distance charges. So those are the ones that I could actually get information from. And every now and then there would be BBSs or like 800 numbers, right? But you'd have to like get access, and I didn't have access to some of those, at all times.
So the high school out of high school NSA program coincided and it
With
ran alongside your
with
things in
school,
college?
right? You were a full-time employee. They let you actually go to school, but your time when you're not at school, you're basically working for them. Um, and so
Right.
it was an interesting program. To your earlier question, which I think is important, which is like how did that impact my worldview?
Right. What did you learn there at the NSA? Like what were the early things there that, informed your worldview that that there's a career here, and maybe the early first signs of there's a company here and there's a business here?
It didn't teach me that there was a business, but it impacted the way that I realized like the importance of what we were doing. Like at a very, very, global impact. Oh
Impact was
yeah,
clear.
it was very obviously like you knew what you were doing was really important, and I think that was something that actually bled into, after I left the agency. One of the things I did was, and I went to work straight into industry. I worked at Ernst and Young. I worked at Honeywell before starting Bishop Fox. But even through all of that, I realized that what we were doing was really important, and I never really thought about it as like, hey, is there a career here? It's very different today. People are like, oh, I want to start a career in cybersecurity. Cybersecurity wasn't even what we called it back then. You remember, it was information
Right.
security, right?
It was
InfoSec.
infosec, yeah.
And nobody knew what that meant. Like you couldn't go to a bar and be like, yeah, I'm in InfoSec. Now you can just literally go to a bar and be like, I'm in cyber. And they're like, oh, cybersecurity, A lot of times I'd go and they'd be
Right,
like,
right, right.
security, like stocks, securities, and like, no. So I wouldn't even explain it, right? I just tell people I was in IT, but it wasn't a career. It was always interesting. So it didn't really matter. I mean, I think that's the difference between the crew back then and where the market is today. Not to take anything away from either one of those, but the people 20 years ago who were interested in it, it was a bucket of misfits, people that like
Yeah.
found each other because they were interested in it. Like career be damned, like people were coming in from all over. And I think that's a lot of the reason our industry today is still one where you can come in from anywhere with any background, is because there was no
Right.
prerequisite for that. There was no, you have to get this degree.
On the flip side of that, though, right, this was just a loose collection of folks coming together and piecing this
Yeah.
industry together, and for the most part, building the technology and kind of duct taping everything together in a way that leaves us with this tech debt and complexity and so on. Like a lot of what we were going through and seeing in the late 90s through to 2000. I just had Marty Resch on the
Hmm.
podcast talking about how things have changed and the kind of tech debt that's left today that's created this big, massive, burgeoning cybersecurity
Yeah.
industry. Do you see remnants of that where there are things you wish we did differently on the building
I
side?
don't know that we could have done it differently. How
You
could we
don't
do
think
it?
so?
We were piecing it together. There was no grand unified theory of like, hey, here's the security framework that we've got to build, and here's the building block. Like you kind of have that today, but there's so many
Right.
unsolved problems even today. You look back at what we were doing, and was like, oh, I didn't know you could do that. And then you'd have to come up with a solution for it. Like, oh, but what if I do this? And then they're like, we gotta solve that too. That's how security's
Right.
evolved. Nobody had a plan of like, okay, first we're gonna tackle network security, then we're gonna do applications. And by the way, web apps are gonna be really weird, so you better get ready for this. I know you
Right.
don't think it's a big thing now, but cross-site scripting, actually, everyone used to make fun of it. I did too. And now it's like, oh yeah, you know what? Client side code execution, like people are storing a lot of stuff and a lot of secrets on those clients. Like you actually have to be aware of it. Like there's so much that is just a reaction, and it's a cat and mouse game. And it has always been a cat and mouse game. Yeah, we've got tech debt, but you know what? Like I don't think there was a,
Yeah, but we'll never overcome that tech debt, right? We'll never overcome that tech debt and that complexity that's left us where we are.
I
I
guess you're
mean,
a pessimist.
Yeah, I want to get into whether the optimism,
Yeah,
pessimism thing later on, because I have it down to my last question. But let's rewind to the early days of Stack and Do, because you mentioned piecing things
yeah,
together. Like you guys had to literally make up the methodology for hacking
yeah,
and make up these methodologies for what the scoping of a
yeah.
project would look like, what the report would look like, and all of that stuff. Like a lot of it, like where did you find the mentors and the inspiration to figure that out, or were you guys literally figuring it out on your own from
I mean,
scratch?
we built on the shoulders of the people who came before us, right? Like, I mean, I spent a little over a year with Ernst and Young's Advanced Security Center, where we were doing a lot of that work. So there was a lot of professionalism that was kind of imbued in what we were doing for these Fortune 500 companies. And you know, there's like, I want to say some of the early E&Y folks were like Stuart McClure, George Kurtz, right? They were like the generation before us. And so they had kind of laid the groundwork and we really expanded on it and kind of took it to the next level. They wound up with Foundstone, which eventually got bought by McAfee. You had a bunch of guys from At Stake, which is actually one of the reasons I left the agency was because every all of my peers wound up getting like Dave got hired by. Look, don't even get me wrong. I wasn't even a peer of theirs. They were like so far above me. Don't get like they still are like so much better than I am. But like I say my
Right.
contemporaries, perhaps the people who happen to be working in the same area as me, they all went over to AtStake, right? And so like those guys were doing it while I was finishing up school, and then a few years later, I started Bishop Fox, Stack and Lou as it was called back then. But yeah, a lot of like, how are you going to tackle this new technology that came out? Like web application testing was still pretty much in its early infancy. Tools were just coming out for doing dynamic scanning. People used to try to do product comparisons between DAST and SAST, and it's like they're not the same guy. Like they find totally different classes of vulnerabilities. Like, but that was the early days.
Did you ever imagine? I was just when I was prepping for this interview, I went back and I saw a video of you doing a Blue Hat talk, maybe
Yeah,
Blue Hat one or
yeah.
Blue Hat two in the
Yeah, I
early
think it
two
was number
thousands.
two or
About
number eight. I
yeah,
did two blue hat takes, but
on,
yeah,
yeah, on some web app thing where you were showing them how search boxes can expose certain things. It was like really, it feels now looking back like rudimentary
yeah.
hacking. Can you paint a picture at the time about what the landscape looked like in the stack and loot days? One and two, this was around the time of the birth of the industry because it wasn't only you guys. They had the IO Active out to Seattle. Microsoft had hired a bunch of these boutique penetration testing shops to help with Vista and to help with XP Service
Yeah.
Pack 2. So now we're starting to see the emergence of this hack for hire business, this offensive security computing
Totally.
business. But when you go back to those early Blue Hat days and web apps are starting to become a thing, could you ever imagine being here?
No, no. I mean, I think I learned really early on with the speed with which technology was moving, and then the speed at which security was moving on top of that, which I think is a multiple higher. I would have never imagined it. I mean, like I said, it was like in the early days, we were all figuring out stuff for the first time. It was like I remember when you know when a guy at Blue Hat was presenting about printer drivers, right? And it's like, hey, you know what? These have access to the kernel. Like, we got to be really worried about drivers and making sure that these things are secure. And it's like, there's been massive amounts of improvement, signing, and all sorts of stuff that happens.
Right.
We didn't used to do that. We didn't used to do that, right? And it's wild, and it all seems super rudimentary. But somebody's got to take those first few steps. Like, I'll look back at some of the exploits that I wrote, and I'm like, none of them would work anymore because of ASLR or some other type of like protection
Right.
mechanism. But like back in the day when we were writing overflows, it was like, okay, well, there's like your straight buffer overflow, you've got your SEH overflows, you've got like,
No mitigations, no sandbox to jump out of, none of that stuff. It was, yeah.
and you had a big question. I was like, are they ever going to turn it on by default? I mean, you should, but maybe they never will, and we'll just have like a playground forever.
So you've been at what I would call like a pioneer in this pen test industry. You've watched this evolution of the pen test, from what used to be this point in that time thing where you put three man hours or three people on a project for 3 weeks, and we kind of write a report on the state of the security of that, to a model that went beyond pen testing, ongoing assessments,
Yeah,
web apps, to mobile. Bug bounty industry came in and kind of found a niche within this world and so on. So you've been watching the evolution of this space over the
yeah.
years. What would you say is the biggest advancement your industry has made? What is the singular thing that's kicked the ball down the road in a significant way?
I think it's actually happening right now. I think it's actually happening right now is what I would tell you.
So where we're right now, you feel like we're right now at a transition point, at some sort of transformational period
I think,
in pen testing. So
yeah,
talk me through it. Walk me through where we are and where we're heading.
where we largely are, where most of the market is right now, is still in point in time penetration testing. And I would say about 2 years ago, you really started to see the beginnings of the shift around it. And we started looking, I mean, because again, we've been around for 17 years in the form of Bishop Fox. A lot of our people have been doing pen testing even before then, but in our current form, we've been in business for 17 years. So we saw very early on when it was, what's your methodology? Okay, well, what are your IP addresses? Scan those IP addresses with a vulnerability scanner, follow up on those results, and then do a little bit of manual penetration testing on top of it. That has largely been unchanged for the past 15 years. And then on top of that, with a few modifications because you're doing different technologies and you're doing different things. So like the attack approach is a little bit different, but it all boils down to, are you injecting data? Is there misconfiguration, right? Are you able to elicit some, is there a missing patch as part of this thing? Is there a bad authentication or password, right? Or is there sensitive information leaks? Those are the only 5 ways that you're going to break into an organization or into an application.
Right.
It's just those five things. And so it's some variation of that, but the methodology has pretty much been static. It's been the same. And so now you're seeing this expansion where it's 80% manual effort, and that has been going on. Now we've reached a point though where the number of targets that have to be assessed to ensure security is reaching a point where like you cannot grow human talent fast enough to keep up with it, despite all of the advancements that we have. And the amount of information available now is just like loads more than we used to have. It went from like searching for a text file that you'd have to decipher and then like cross reference to figure out what it is, to having just like an explosion of information where you can just watch somebody like on a YouTube video or listen to a podcast like this
Right.
and gather information about the industry. And what's happened in the last 2 years is a major shift. And I'd actually tell you that there's a few shifts from a technology standpoint. We've actually gotten to the point where infrastructure and technology and tooling has allowed us to begin delivering and begin discovering assets on our own, right? The attack surface management space has really kind of spun up in the last few years. And then the operationalization of that data to feed into more continuous testing and identification engines allow us to more accurately identify and quickly identify vulnerabilities. And so you're seeing a lot more of that. Certainly the attackers are on it already, right? The fact that every time there's a new CVE that's critical or high risk or a new proof of
Right.
concept exploit that goes, the entire internet's getting exploited for it, right? That's happening. It's happening at scale. And what we're doing now in the industry, certainly at Bishop Fox, and I see a few other folks trying to mimic and copy that, is how do you provide continuous visibility of where your assets are, but on top of that, at a depth, not just like, oh, here's the IPs and ports, but at a depth and a richness that allows you to say, oh, also here's all my technologies that are exposed and all the vulnerabilities that I might have. And that's kind of the next evolution, is moving from this sort of, let me let me go tell you what my assets are, go run a test once a year, maybe twice a year. But in between, I'm going to have no visibility. And we're actually starting to see that because when we do our assessments today, what we find is that, like actually this happened like 2 weeks ago. We're in the middle of writing a report and our engine picked up a vulnerability the day before the report went out. And it was like, you know what? How did you
Right.
find it? You need to know about this, right? And so we can continually update our customer as to what's going on.
And we linger a little bit on the people versus automation piece. You mentioned we're right at that tipping point, and I think I heard it at 80-20 kind of distribution. What is the preferred perfect tipping point where automation takes over that helps us manage this people crisis? Because you're in a people
Yeah.
business. At the end of the
Yeah.
day, it doesn't matter what the AI does and what the scanner does. A human still has to put some eyeballs on it and figure if it's exploitable or if he can get a trophy with it or whatever it
Yeah.
is. What is that tipping point in your
Okay.
mind?
So it's not so simple, right? I wish I could give you the hey, it's like 50%, 60%. But
Yeah, but what is it in your mind that makes Bishop Fox like it's now a smoothly running enterprise where I don't have to worry about my HR campaigns to try to find
well, I
people?
think the big difference between what we're doing and what other people like, we've got a platform called Cosmos, and the difference is that we combine all the advancements and the advantages of automation, but we marry it with expert operators on the receiving end.
Right. And that's going to be a continuous problem for you. Not a continuous problem, but a continuous reality for you is that you still need to augment it with these top quality
Yes.
skills in a market where it's becoming very, very competitive to find those people, and they're just not
Yeah,
available.
exactly.
And that's why I'm trying to get a sense of, in your mind, as you strategically look at Bishop Fox over the long term, what is that? What has to be?
The
You know what I
short
mean?
version is I think you've got to augment every single operator with an Iron Man suit. Every operator needs an Iron Man suit to be more effective, to be more intelligent, to have automation.
Define an operator. Define
Yeah.
an operator here, because that's a new word.
So, essentially for us, operator is a tester, a researcher. There's a lot of different names for what they do, but essentially they break into systems, right? They write
And they're running Cosmos. They're the guys on the platform doing the scans,
yeah,
running this continuous automated interface scanning thing, and they're surfacing findings to another group, or are they a part of like figuring out
they're
findings as
part of
well?
the exploitation crew, right? Like we essentially adopt a
Okay,
lot of the same terminology that you would find in, NSA and military, and the people who
I
are
see.
actually performing the work of exploitation itself, because so much of our team background and history comes from that, especially from the Cosmos side of the house. What we've also done recently
Right.
is we've actually started marrying in a lot of some of the strongest bug bounty researchers and bringing them into the fold to get a different perspective on it, right? So we get a lot of the bug bounty creativity that's out there. We're marrying it with the operational discipline and the rigor and just the strength of technical knowledge that we've got from NSA style, delivery and service
Right.
mechanisms. So, uh, so that's essentially it, right? To answer your question in a little bit more detail, every vulnerability can be automated to a different degree. But the more and more you can automate each one, the less work it leaves, less grind work, grunt work that needs to be done. And it allows operators to spend their time not doing, crappy low value work, but to actually do the art, the creativity of the testing, to think about, hey, how am I going to bypass this filter, or how am I going to chain these vulnerabilities, instead of, oh, I got to go remember to run, Hydra or run another Nessus scan or do this. Like that's not valuable. But the real thing is like we have to pick up where those vulnerability scanners leave off with automation to automate the 80% of the work that's not being touched by any of the existing tooling. Because those tools were built like 10 years ago, 15 years ago. They
Right.
haven't
Right.
changed fundamentally in the least.
Where do you stand on the hiring staff shortage, skills shortage in the industry? Because there's a variety of thoughts that we actually do have a skills shortage, and we really need to ramp up training and ramp up attraction into
Yeah.
the industry. And then there's another school of thought that we're not doing HR well, we're not doing hiring well, we're not doing recruiting well, we're not looking in places where are you? Because the people is a crucial part of like the stability of Bishop Fox. Is like you're a people business at the
Yeah.
end of the day.
My high level commentary is I think the market actually is very reflective of where we are from a cybersecurity talent perspective. So my position is like, well, if we had just an abundance of people that were sitting around, but we just couldn't find them, that they're out there, like the market would go and find them because it'd be way less expensive to go do that than to see like
So you're a believer that there's a skill
absolutely.
shortage.
I don't like where are these people that are saying there's no shortage? Like, well, then you should start a business that, if you clearly are aware of people who have skills, then you could make a lot of money by providing those skilled individuals to all of these people who are looking. Otherwise, salaries wouldn't be increasing at the rate that they were increasing. I mean, you have to be insane to think that like people want to like, you know, just let people sit on the sidelines and not put them, give them gainful employment. It's absurd.
Fair enough. If we do have a skill shortage and there's this big giant competition for a handful of really, really talented people, and we have a massive skills shortage. Like, where do we go from here? Like, how do we overcome this in a way where it's meaningful?
Yeah.
One, not only for you, for your company or for specific companies, but for the industry as a whole, where small,
Yeah.
medium-sized businesses have no chance of getting people in house, and then you end up with a security tax on that burdens companies without resources, and then you have the rich and the haves and the
Yeah.
have-nots. And we end up with where we are today with ransomware everywhere and everyone's breached and everyone's infected. Like, how do we fix this?
Well, I mean, I think I think people with way deeper pocketbooks could certainly help. I think a works program around it. I mean, like like imagine if there was like a new deal for cybersecurity where you could actually just put people to work in cybersecurity, give them the
So you think there's a role for government here?
absolutely. Like the government's not doing like, okay, well, you might have to edit this out later, but the government's not doing anything for us otherwise, okay? They've been serving the same like
True.
17 customers in the defense industrial base for the last 20 years. But for everyone else, you can go pound sand. So look,
It's true.
like if you're gonna do something. Stop taking pictures with people at conferences and like pretending like you're gonna do something useful. Look, I went to DC a couple months
I
ago,
love
all
it.
right, and I had dinner.
I'm not editing any of this, by the way. Go ahead. You had dinner with.
Shit. Look, and I'll just tell you, like, I don't spend a lot of time in DC. I don't know what goes on there. Like I can see I just see what happens from a private sector. I spend a huge amount of time in the private sector. CISOs at
Right.
large to medium enterprises pretty much like several hours every week talking to different CISOs at these types of organizations, understanding what's going on. Nobody's getting help, right? Unless you're like in a very handful of select industries that they've kind of got relationships with, and if you're Microsoft or Cisco, that's about it. Uh,
Right.
so so where's I going to go with this? I'm having dinner and I'm sitting down with a bunch of like people with like really fancy titles from the government, right? And they're having conversation and I'm sitting there listening and I'm like, I've been in this industry for 23 years. I've been in this industry for 23 years. I have no idea what you're talking about. You are using a completely different
True.
vocabulary than me and you just absolutely no connection to the problems that private industry CISOs are facing. Do I expect the government to step in and magically figure out how to engage? Like, I don't know. At this point, you ask me if I'm both an optimist and a pessimist, depends on what topic. But after like 20 years, I don't expect the government to come in and do anything for us.
So you don't have any confidence that the executive order pushing multi-factor authentication, mandating multi-factor authentication, some of the efforts around like a must-patch vulnerability list, some of the executive orders around supply chain mandates and zero trust mandates. Do you think that
The
helps in any way at all to filter down to rest of industry? Do you think all boats will float from this?
point for Ryan, I do agree with you on that. I do think that's making a difference. I think the
Right?
government is
Because
good
I
at
mean there's some
the
energy.
government is good at regulating and creating incentives or disincentives for certain performance. That is the one thing that they have. I should clarify that I think a lot of what I'm bitching about is really just the like
Fair enough.
the fake engagement. But when the White House
Right.
comes out with that stuff, people do pay attention. When the SEC and the FTC actually start going after people, like that actually turns heads. And I do agree.
And it does affect private
Absolutely,
sector change as
absolutely,
well.
yeah,
It does
yeah,
push it down. I want to close on some good news. Congratulations on your recent round of funding. You just raised $75 million. I want to ask a little bit this question in a little roundabout way. It took you close to 14, 15 years to decide to go the VC route. You guys were a partnership,
yeah.
just building this thing out, just growing the company significantly year over year. What went into the decision to go the VC route? Like why decide to go that route now? And talk a little bit about what has happened since the Series A to the point now where you raise 75 million in an environment where we're told it's tough to
Yeah.
raise money. So talk to me a little bit about what you've done so far.
I tell you the initial decision to raise money was, so we'd been in business 13 years, and in our like 14th year we were like, yeah, we want to, 13th, 14th year we wanted to raise money. It was because we were growing and doubling every 2 years, and we had reached a point where we realized we needed to really professionalize the business side of things, right? Because we all came from like hacking backgrounds. And so we could get it only so far before we knew we needed to bring in some professionals. And I think at that point we were probably like 120, 140 people when we raised the
Right,
funds.
right.
The second thing was we saw the writing on the wall that there was no way we could scale to meet the demands of the market without investing in this technology that we had been incubating internally. So we took that Series A funding to build the Cosmos platform, right? That's our Iron Man suit for hackers, essentially, that allows us to work with way more
Right.
leverage and speed. And we said, one, can we build a professional version of this for our operators, for our hackers, our consultants, our testers, whatever you want to call them? Number two, will customers buy it? And number three, does it actually allow us to deliver with more leverage? And over the 3 years since we took the Series A, the answer to all three of those resoundingly was yes. And it gave us the confidence to say, you know what? Instead of this having like this Iron Man suit is a real thing, right? It's like the one that was built in the cave, right? In the first movie, right?
Right,
And it's
right.
like we can do better. There's another version of us that we want to build, and so that's really the impetus for the second one. We realize the impact that we can make, along with, and I'll link this back to the question you asked earlier, we are investing heavily in Bishop Fox Academy. We don't expect to show up, and this is a
Right.
fundamental difference.
What is Bishop Fox Academy?
It's
Just for the folks who've never heard about it, give me a little bit about what
it
that
is
is.
a comprehensive training program for us to be able to identify really talented people who have the beginnings of demonstrated skill, but like demonstrated talent more than anything else.
It's externally facing to it's a talent
It's it's
attraction
designed to
program.
allow us to attract people to work at Bishop Fox and to grow their skills at any level,
Train them.
not just junior to senior, but even seniors expanding their skill sets because of how nuanced and sophisticated the offensive security market is today. And that's the difference. A lot of people are expecting, oh, I should be able to just show up and there should be talent available to me. It was like, that's not, that's like foraging. If somebody finds that berry bush before you do, you're shit out of luck. Like, you got to farm, you got to build it. You want to have something long lasting and impactful. This is the reason humans stopped becoming hunter
Right.
gatherers. Like, farming makes a lot more sense. Like, that's where we're going. That's what we're building. We're investing not to like be a short term company that's like, I mean, obviously we're 17 years old, but like we're in this for the long haul because we want to make a difference.
I got a last question for you is something that I hear from CISOs a lot. I spend a lot of time talking to CISOs, not only on this podcast, but for articles I write and so on, is continuous, continuous, continuous assessment, this continuous penetration testing. What Cosmos does is inevitably the future. This is the only way you can survive, but it's freaking expensive. It's a very, very pricey proposition. And it removes it from the majority of businesses, whether you're medium to small enterprises. Is there a version so that those folks aren't left behind? That I mean, not from Bishop Fox, but just generally, is there an approach to continuous testing for the
Yeah,
rest of us?
I think it's actually one of the things that we learned in the last 3 years, and it's something that we are creating as we develop more automation. It becomes less expensive to produce, like any initial technology that's being developed that's kind of on the bleeding edge. And I think we're actually at the point now, and you'll see this actually from us, and you might even see it from other people. But I think you're going to start to see a more uh, affordable version that meets the needs of mid-market commercial sector type
Right.
companies that are subject to the same requirements and needs, but are in a very accessible price point. Because we've had 3 years of
Yeah.
development behind it, like it's a lot more automation has been built, and I think that's the goal of this is not just to be another company serving only the enterprise, but to actually you can make a massive
Right.
impact to all of these other organizations as well.
Thank you very much, Vinny. This was a lot of fun. Come back. Let's do it again when we get some more black hat presentations. Some of the other stuff that always keeps coming out of Bishop Fox. As you know, I'm a big fan, and it's been fun to watch from the sidelines how the company has grown and evolved. So congratulations on
Thanks,
everything, and
Ryan.
thanks again.
Appreciate it.